Let me just double check that my microphone is definitely on. Surprise! It's an extra video! I hope you're enjoying this series where I take you step by step through the making of a 1940s suit dress. After all that precision pinning in the last episode, we are now finally, and I mean it this time, onto the sewing. So let's get started. Now first of all, I of course have to install my knee lift bar. This enables me to lift the presser foot without using my hands. Oh yeah, look at that sexy knee lift action. And now my top tip for making the sewing of toiles and mock-ups more bearable, turn your stitch length all the way up to maximum. This helps in many ways. 1, it makes the sewing machine run faster, and 2, it's much easier to unpick when you inevitably need to make alterations. And so now we're finally ready to sew, starting with the darts, of course. I kind of forgot about using my knee lift for the first one. It always takes me a little while to get back into the feel of it. But sewing darts is always the same. Start at the widest end of the dart and sew towards the point, running off the edge to avoid a pucker at the tip of the dart, which can look weird, especially if the darts are pointing towards your boobs. I'm starting with the front pieces here. No particular reason for that, just because they are on the top of the pile. When I run off the end of the dart, I make sure to cut the thread with a long tail left. If this were an actual garment, I would then tie off those threads, but as this is only a mock-up, and I'm likely to move the darts in a fitting, I'm just leaving the long threads as is. This is enough to stop them coming undone in the meantime, and will make it easier to unpick things in the fitting. Next is the skirt seams. Just long straight seams here, nothing fancy, but I'm making sure that I'm sewing exactly along that chalked in sewing line. I'm not really even paying attention to the width markings on the needle plate, I'm just following the sewing line. Oh, and I dropped a pin. You can see as I'm working towards the hem of the seam that the top layer of fabric is starting to bubble. This is probably because my pinning wasn't entirely accurate and the presser foot on the machine can shift one layer of fabric more than the other. That's why I'm starting at the waistline, where it's more important that the seams match, and smoothing the excess out towards the hem. It's much easier to even up any discrepancy in the hem than it is at the waistline. For the centre back seam, I remembered to start the seam at the double pins so that I'll have an opening to be able to get the skirt on. To precisely start where the pins are, I lower the presser foot with the pins still in, move the needle down so that it's in the fabric, then lift the presser foot to take the pins out. This means that there's no chance of the layers of fabric shifting as I take the pins out. Then it's the same again, sewing along the chalked in sewing line towards the hem. I take my pins out as I go, just because this new sewing machine was very expensive, and I'm using relatively thick and chunky pins here, so I just don't want to risk it. I do sometimes sew over my pins, but that's usually only in situations where taking the pins out is likely to cause the fabric to shift and create a whole bunch of other issues. And repeat for all the other skirt seams. It's moments like this that I wish I had an industrial sewing machine. Don't get me wrong, I love my Bernina, but even with the stitch length on 5, it's just not quite fast enough to not make sewing endless straight skirt seams hideously boring. So with the fronts and skirt seams done, it's onto the sleeves. You may remember these 3 tiny darts at the elbow of the sleeve. I don't have a sewing line drawn on for these, so I'm just starting at the 1/4 inch mark I made and tapering out to the edge of the dart. But basically it's the same thing again, starting at the widest part of the dart, sewing towards the point where I sew off the edge of the fabric and leave a long tail of thread. You might have noticed when I start sewing, I don't reverse straight away. I only reverse once I'm outside the seam allowance. That's because I want the strength of the reverse stitches to be within the actual body of the garment and not the edge of the seam allowance, which isn't really under any pressure. So one sleeve done, and now repeat for the next one. These teeny tiny darts are so fiddly, and I had to be really careful to not catch the pins that were on the underside of the fabric as I sewed each dart. This was one of those times I was really glad of my knee lift, so I could use both hands to make sure everything was perfectly lined up before I put the presser foot down. At some point, I must have also sewn the darts in the back, but really, how many darts do we need in one video? I think that's enough for now. With everything sewn, it's time to start pressing. What I do for pressing while sewing is just push my sewing machine back, which means I have to take out the knee lift bar, but oh well. But then I can get out my pressing mat, plug my iron in to warm up, and my tailor's ham, or whatever it is that I'm using. I tend to press most things over a tailor's ham, just because I find it easier. So let's start with all the darts. I also take this moment to clip all the threads I don't need to leave long, so ones not at the points of the darts. Then I fit the curve of the ham into the angle of the dart. Honestly, I just do whatever works best and press. For the sleeves, I'm pressing the darts down towards the cuff so that when I put my hand in, I don't catch my fingers on the little folds of excess fabric. As I've got no steam, I'm having to really give these darts a thorough going over, which wasn't ideal, but many of you suggested a spray bottle of water and spritzing the fabric before ironing it, which I shall have to try next time. And then the same again for the second sleeve. And then this is me realizing that you've just got a lovely close-up of my elbow, so I switch hands so you can see what I'm doing. Then here are those back darts that seem to have mysteriously sewn themselves because I couldn't find any footage of it. Again, trimming the threads at the wide end of the dart, and this time I'm pressing the darts towards the centre back. I've seen it done both ways, either towards the centre or the side seam. I really don't think it makes much of a difference, so long as you pick one and stick to it. Whatever floats your boat. And so for the fronts, I'm pressing the waist darts towards the centre front to match the centre back, and then the side dart I'm pressing down. Thanks to the way I trued up the paper pattern, all the folded edges of that dart sit really nicely. And with it pressed in place, it'll be much easier to sew that side seam later. It's quite a chunky dart, so I may decide that in the final fabric, which is a wool crepe, it'll be too bulky and I may trim away some of the excess material. But for a toile, it'll be fine like this. And we do it all again for the other front piece. Now for the skirt seams. As those side seams are so curved, it's actually much easier to press them over a ham than it is to try and get them to lay flat on an ironing board. This can be fiddly because my ham is only small and doesn't quite fill out the curve of the hip enough to be able to press it easily, but I managed by standing the ham on its edge, which isn't very secure and does feel really precarious as you're ironing it. But for the rest of the skirt seams, I used my sleeve board. I could have used my tabletop ironing board, but because of the position of the legs on that one, you can't slide a tube of fabric onto it because the legs get in the way. So I find that the sleeve board, while small, is actually easier to press things like this. I start by creasing the seams open with my fingers. This doesn't work with every kind of fabric, but with Calico, it's really easy to get it to hold a crease with just the pressure and warmth from your fingers. I find it's much easier to press a long seam like this if I've run a fingernail along the stitching first, creasing it into place. I'm pressing the straight seams here and the lower sections of the curved side seams, which I didn't press with the ham. Oh look, here's a great shot of me creasing that seam open with my fingers before I show it the iron. Hopefully, you can see from that just what I mean. So with all that done, it's time to update my to-do list. Oh, and then here we are. Look at that, me, talking to the camera, with no idea that the mic is off. Look at the camera, Claude. See that the mic is off. Claude! No! Oh, what an idiot. What am I even doing? Okay, that's enough of that. Now that I had all those first stages sewed and pressed, I could pin together the seams that I had avoided earlier because they were too fiddly to sew or crossed another seam line, so that's the shoulder and side seams on the bodice. The back shoulder seam was weirdly curved, so I was kind of expecting it not to fit together with the front smoothly, but then I realised that the curve was probably deliberate to create a little ease. Back shoulder seams are traditionally a little longer than the front and are eased in to accommodate the more rounded shape of the back of the shoulder. Plus, this garment has shoulder pads as part of the design, so there needs to be a lot of room in there to accommodate the extra padding. I pinned these seams using the precision pinning technique I demonstrated more clearly in the last video. But this helped me to ease in the seams nicely and make sure everything lined up. For the side seams, I'd done most of the hard work in the patterning stage, making sure that the side seams would still match up after I'd sewn the dart. So this seam was pretty straightforward, and all I really needed to watch out for was the excess fabric of the dart, so I made sure I pinned it flat so it wouldn't get in the way. Then, with all the pinning done, I could sew all those seams at once. For the side seams, I started at the underarm and worked towards the hem. This not only meant that I was smoothing the fabric in a downwards direction as I sewed, but it also meant that I could sew smoothly over the fabric of the dart, making it easier to ensure I didn't catch it up anywhere I wasn't supposed to. For the shoulder seams, I start at the outside edge of the shoulder and sew towards the neck. I had to be careful to ease in the excess as I sewed, but there wasn't a huge amount of ease, so it all went pretty smoothly thanks to my careful pinning. For the second shoulder, I realised that I had pinned the fabric from the wrong side, so that when I came to sew the seam, the pins were underneath the fabric and not on top. This was okay, but it did mean I had to be especially careful when I take them out. With all the stitching done, all I had to do was press these seams open. Again, I used my tailor's ham. I didn't even bother getting out my pressing mat because I knew it would be much easier to press the now 3D bodice over the 3D ham than try and wrestle the seams flat on the pressing mat. And then that was it for the day. I've still got the sleeves to do, but then it's on to the fitting. Thanks for bearing with me through my technical mishap this week. Let's hope that after all this work, the toile fits. Thanks for watching. See you next time.